What up, wise guys? It's your wise girl Alicia, and today we're talking about decision making. We make decisions every single day, some big, some small,
I'm gonna choose from the low fiber end of the shelf. Hello, honey puffs.
some on our own,
I'll take the cheeseburger meal.
and some with others.
So let's split up and look for wells in that book.
I think it'd be a lot safer if we all stay together.
And even though we get to practice this skill every day, we don't always talk about how we make those decisions or how to make those decisions with other people. And when we're making decisions, there's about 5 different routes that we take. We're either impulsive.
Oh, come on. Fortune telling is nonsense.
Sometimes we procrastinate so long that we're only left with one option.
I'll do it this afternoon.
And sometimes we completely don't decide altogether, which of itself is a decision. Sometimes we let others make decisions for us.
Who wants to land the planey plane?
Ooh, the planey plane.
And then sometimes, for those really big decisions, we really need to evaluate and consider all of our options before we choose. So if we've spent all of our previous videos talking about relationships, mental health, and sexual health, I think it's important that we talk about how to make decisions within romantic or sexual relationships, so that we know our decisions are in line with our personal values and communicated clearly between partners. So some quick examples of decisions that people make within sexual or romantic relationships could be: who pays for dates? Are partners going to be introduced to family members? Is this a relationship that people only date each other? Or what about relationship labels that people are comfortable using? Or even things like, do partners want to announce their relationship on social media? There are lots of decisions to make when someone is in a romantic or sexual relationship. But for this video, I wanted to focus particularly on sexual relationships and one of the biggest decisions that that kind of relationship has to make. And that is whether or not people decide to have sex. Now, when it comes to whether or not partners decide to have sex, you might think it's pretty black and white. It's either yes or no. Right?
No, it's much more complicated than that.
There are actually kind of a lot of things to consider when partners are making that decision. And a great way to start that conversation about making that decision between partners is to go over what are the choices and what are the alternatives. It's a super great time to start talking about boundaries and wants and concerns. But it's also a great time to talk about alternative activities that they might not be sexual, but they might still be intimate and a way to bond. So it could be conversations about people's comfort level with cuddling or holding hands when they're in public. Another really important step to making this decision is for partners to gather all the information necessary. This includes having conversations around people's values around sex, as well as understanding where to get things like condoms or dental dams from, or even places to go get STI tested. And then as partners go through this decision-making process, it can also be really helpful to go through like a pro and con list. Like, what are the pros and cons to having sex? What are the pros and cons to not having sex? Things to consider would be, is there a risk for an undetected pregnancy? What are the STI risks? And how could this decision impact someone's social status or reputation? You can also consider things like, how will this decision impact things in the short term? Or what about in the long term? But this conversation is really important because all partners need to make it together. And it's a wonderful opportunity to practice those I statements and practice active listening to build communication between partners too. I want to do a callback to our bonus lesson about consent, just to remind everyone that even if a yes decision has been made, if at any point someone changes their decision and says no, that should be respected and listened to. This just reinforces the importance of communication between partners so that everyone feels safe and secure and respected in their decisions. Another thing to think about when we're talking about decision making is the impact of drug and alcohol use. When we talk about drug and alcohol use, I think it's important to acknowledge that these chemicals can really affect someone's brain and the way that they make decisions regardless of age. Because basically what happens with these chemicals is it impacts the cortex of the brain. So if this is your brain, This is the cortex. It's that front part of the brain. This part of the brain is used for reasoning. It helps us stay calm and assess situations. It helps us judge consequences and make good decisions. And it also controls our reflexes. But when drugs or alcohol impact the cortex of our brain, it can slow a lot of these functions down or even make them impaired, which is why people's judgments are so faulty or their reflexes are inhibited. That's why people can't catch themselves if they fall down or they can't walk in a straight line. It's because that cortex is impaired. And then if there's continued drinking, the next system of the brain that gets impaired is the limbic system. So if this is our brain, this is the cortex, this here in the middle, this is our limbic system. This system is where emotions are processed. It's also been called the lizard brain, because this part of the brain determines our fight, flight, or freeze responses. And so basically how these two systems work together is we've got our brain here and we get signals that go to our limbic system. And then in a healthy brain, it goes into our cortex that helps us make good decisions. But if there's been long-term drug or alcohol use, that system that kind of connects the two gets really weak and people stay in this limbic system. And so it makes it even more likely that someone will act on their impulses instead of thinking through their decision making. And I know I said before that drugs and alcohol can impact the brain at any stage of life, but I want to take a second to explain why there is so much messaging about not doing drugs or alcohol when you're a young person. So during your teen years, your brain is going through an incredible amount of growth. In fact, most people's brains aren't done developing until they're about 25 or 30. But during adolescence, during those teen years, there's a huge surge in growth. In fact, the only other time that your brain is going through that much development is when you're like a baby to 5 years old. And that surge in growth is why you have those moments of like, why'd you do that? I don't know. And that's because the cortex of your brain, the part that helps us make those decisions, is going through a lot of growth right now. And so sometimes it really doesn't know why you made that decision. Now, it's not an excuse, but it is what's happening in your brain. And so when I talk about adolescent brain development, the easiest way I can do that is to picture that your brain is a house. So imagine that this house is your brain, but before your adolescence, so when you were like a kid. But as you grow up, you need more space for all your thoughts and your memories. So what do? We do some remodeling. And in order to do that, we tear everything down to the studs. Now, all through your adolescence, your brain is like this. It's bare bones, it's down to the studs, and it's adding in new bedrooms, new closets, bathrooms, the whole 9 yards. However, if someone uses drugs or alcohol during this rebuilding phase, it's almost like bringing in a drunk or high contractor. So yeah, the walls will still go up, but they might be a little lopsided or a little crooked. And if the builders are always drunk or high, then the walls to that house might permanently be lopsided. And you really only get this remodeling phase once. So it's important to take care of the builders and contractors on your brain so that you have the nicest and healthiest house to grow up in. So not only do drugs and alcohol affect our ability to make decisions in the moment, frequent use, especially during that adolescent brain remodel phase, can make it even harder to make decisions when you're older. And learning how to make decisions is a big part of growing up, and it's a big part of adulthood. And yeah, it can be super intimidating, but just remember to use the cortex of your brain and not the lizard brain. And this should send you on the right path to make decisions that feel true to you. And when it comes to sexual or intimate relationships, if all partners are using the cortex of the brain to have calm and understanding conversations, those decisions will feel even better to make. And so with that, we're going to end the video here. For our question of the day, I've actually got a 2-part question for you. Number 1, if your brain is a house, what kind of house do you want it to look like after it's done remodeling? It could look like a ranch or a mansion or a castle. Be as creative as you want. It's your brain house after all. And question number 2, what is something that you're doing right now to make sure that your brain house grows up healthy? This could be anything from like exercising to reading, eating healthy, or avoiding drugs and alcohol. As always, leave your answers down below. I'm really looking forward to seeing these ones. All right, wise guys, see you in the next one. Wise Guys is a program of the Children's Home Society of North Carolina.